Hi, I'm a person, just a short introduction, that lives in my car. I've done a lot of strange things in my life, including surfing on Lake Michigan back in the day. Now people actually surf there, but when I surfed there was never any surfers out. I didn't even know where I was going to get a surfboard. I was going to make one. I got the charts for the bottom configuration of the terrain of the bottom of Lake Michigan from the U.S. Geological Survey, and I studied where the shoreline came up most abruptly from the deep, and I also watched the weather, and then I would go out and check the waves, and I got to where I could predict them really well, just based on the weather from about 3 weather stations, one in Chicago, one in Zion, and one in Milwaukee, because it would show like a consistent wind coming across the lake in a particular direction out of the northeast at a particular speed, which I found to be 25 miles per hour or higher. And then I would drive out there and I would see the waves. I would sit and look at them. And I was trying to figure out how to get a surfboard. And then somebody moved from California to Chicago and they were selling 3 surfboards. I did kind of a Goldilocks thing. I think I went there and they had 3 surfboards in their yard when I got there. It was an ad in the newspaper. It was a really long time ago. It was like the late 80s. And I drove there. I had a Carmen Ghia at the time, which is like what Molly Ringwald drove in Pretty in Pink. There's some other examples in movies and stuff, but I love that car. If it hadn't gotten so rusty and needed so much work, I never would have got rid of it because I was in graduate school at the time, so I had to sell it. But getting back to my original point, it was that I've done a lot of weird things, and that was one of them. Just a lot of stuff. I'm really thoughtful. I'm very open or creative on my psychological tests and everything. Also in the top 1% of IQ. And I went to school and undergraduate in psychology, and then graduate school in neuroscience and evolutionary psychology at Emory University in their PhD program for 4 years. And I started to disagree with the paradigm and what everyone was thinking everything was at the time, so I did end up leaving. First I tried one more school. It wasn't just Emory. I mean, Emory was probably the absolute best school I could have gone to at the time in those things. I think it's definitely one of the best schools out there, for sure. People call it the Harvard of the South and everything. It's one of the reasons I chose it. I got into a couple of schools, but I chose that one for that reason. But so I went to one other school. I went to the University of Memphis just to finish my PhD with a guy that was working on stuff related to what I'd worked on before. But once again, I was like, I can't do this because I'm operating under a paradigm that I know is wrong. It wasn't like I disagreed with it. It was like, it is literally logically wrong, and I know why, what information is missing. But I was a student. I didn't have a PhD already. And in order to get a PhD, I would have had to operate under what I considered to be wrong, learn wrong things, and talk about things in the wrong way, which I couldn't do, for another couple years, perhaps, to finish my PhD. And then a postdoc, which is a few more years. And then once you do that, that's the only way you're going to get grants, is to apply for them based on your track record in your dissertation and postdoc and that sort of thing. So I was like, I could either be locked into this and have a nice career and forget all these problems I have with the paradigm and just milk it, or I could leave and write my own book. And it's like when the Borg Queen was tempting Data in the Star Trek movie with feeling. She could give him skin that had feeling, and he was a robot, and that was something he always wanted. And when he started feeling it, it was like, oh my God, this is like something that makes me human. If you know the history of that program, he really wanted to be like that. And so it was like that kind of a moment for me. And similarly, it took all of 0.0005 seconds to make that decision. It was made before, I already realized I had to get out of there. I just wanted to try one more. So I took a leave of absence, even though I was newly married and I had a baby coming, and I was just like, no, no. Those kinds of things, sometimes employers look for that because it means that you're going to put up with a lot more in your job and work harder because you have a family to support and all that stuff. So that pressure was on me, and I was like, you know what? I trust the universe, and part of the way I look at things differently is that truth, if you just follow truth, then the universe does take care of you. It's not a coincidence, because part of what I did when I left is I wrote my own book instead of a dissertation. It's like a 400-page book or something. Actually, I compressed all the words and everything to try to make it really cheap because I had to print it myself at first. But it was probably more like a 700-page book in the normal fonts and everything and spacing. But what I really wanted to make this video about is about judgment. If you make a judgment of someone or something, that's destruction and fear talking. Always. It's not truth, because a judgment is a static way of categorizing something, putting it into a box so you feel better. And the reason you do that is because you've already done that with yourself. So, I think this is what religions were talking about when they talk about ego and everything, and sin. I think those are just two perspectives looking at the same thing. I use the example for truth and love as being the same thing. They're basically the same. Just viewed in different ways, one more emotionally and one more intellectually. But it's like if you took a ring and you passed it through a two-dimensional plane, you'd see unity, and then you'd see it come apart, and then you'd see it come back together. And that's kind of like the relationship and dance of truth and love in life. It's like that kind of a thing, because we can't see the whole from which those two elements spring, but they're a unified whole, looked at in different ways. And there's so much in life that's like that. And sometimes I used to think I was an alien or something, or some kind of a archangel, or Archangel Michael specifically, because I could see meaning in the smallest things. I could see beyond what people normally saw in things. It's almost like I would see above the 2D plane where everything is separate, and I saw the rings woven together behind the scenes. So what I want to say about judgment isn't just like a surface thing that you might say that it's good to do, or some practical advice, but I mean it more in the holistic sense, like Ian McGilchrist would talk about, that it's involved in everything in the world. And I think it is fundamentally one of those things that we see in isolated ways that is, when writ large in a societal structure or format, becomes the basis for all atrocities, for all conflicts between religions and nations and things like that. So it's pretty important. So I just wanted to make a video about judgment, and it's very closely related to prejudice. A judgment that is made continually, and one that becomes accepted in a society as an interpretation of things, which is what a judgment is in a mimetic evolution sense, something that you've created that's like a symbiotic organism that serves purposes for you socially, and unfortunately it can cause problems and deaths and wars and things on a larger scale. And that's because these things become tied into our emotions, specifically fear above all. So anytime you judge something, you have to remember that that's not really you. That's just thoughts that are in your mind. They have a life of their own. And the reason they have a life is because you have provided the environment and fuel for it. Because of it's hooked into your emotions and your social patterns and everything. I see this more than most people because I think I'm probably on the spectrum, and it's not just something that I've come up with, it's people tell me that. And then I look at my behavior and I look at people's descriptions of what the spectrum is like. I'm like, oh, might have something there. I haven't been formally diagnosed with that. I'm very resistant to the idea also, but because I know I'm weird just because I think about things so much and I look at things so differently. But so this judgment thing, I think it fools people because they think it's just the way things are, and that's one of the things that they need to feel like, because that's the stability that takes away the fear. So it's like, that's why I think partly why you have the Dunning-Kruger effect, because you have people that apply these judgments as a heuristic to actual openness and thought, like to have to change yourself and have to risk or sacrifice. And I think that's the real message of Christ on the cross. Even, I mean, I think this goes very, very deep in the way that Ian McGilchrist talks about the interpretations of either half of the brain is extending out and affecting all of our civilization, and then it feeds back, and this is one of those kinds of things. So if you interpret the symbols correctly, you can see displayed there, hidden already in plain sight, the whole problem or issue. So when you see Christ on a cross, if we take literally what's happening there, we see that there is, and even if you go beyond that back to Roman times when they used to crucify people, they're doing symbolically what the culture is doing to people's connection to divinity. And by that I mean whole truth. And by that I mean highest meaning. And by that I define these things all the way down when I talk about them. A lot of people use the surface words, and that's a problem because they use it like a lever in a social sense. And I've never done that. And I think it's maybe was sparked off by being slightly having tendencies on the spectrum where I didn't just accept what everybody else did. I saw things differently and literally, which threw me out of it. So it was like a lifeline for me, and then I developed it with my intelligence and stuff into these ideas. But that helped me break free from it. So that's how that stuff works. But like, if you look at the Roman times, which I was just talking about, I'll finish that point because it's super important, and not even look at the religious part of it, because then people are going to have these feelings and other baggage. They can't look at it just objectively and literally. So I'm just going to go to a Roman centurion who is crucifying maybe just some criminal or something, and or someone that's a better example than a criminal, because that's more of a functional relation to the actual civilization they're in. But if you look at it when they do that with somebody that's outside their political structure that does something against that, which is purportedly what Christ did, so it's more applicable to there. That's why I like that symbol better, and I think it's why people in general like it better. And I think it's why in general people who sacrifice themselves for something make such an impact, because then we know that they're really telling the truth. Unfortunately, now they're dead. And it's very related to my own life and my own leaving the PhD program to write my own book for the sake of truth. Because I fundamentally believe that truth is built into the universe. Like, it's not something that humans made up, which is definitely a view that someone who's clinging to judgments would not only entertain, would be one of their core rationalizations. That's how it gets its hooks into you. That there isn't a higher truth. Everything is an interpretation or a story, and there's no actual truth. And that's like fundamentally when these mimetic patterns have you. Like when they take your soul, that's the hooks. Boom, they've got you now. You can't get out of that because now you're detached from the higher patterns to things. And you're just floating ready for whatever the meme says or the mimetic complex says. They tend to all work together and enmesh you. Like, you know, you can put on armor for battle, and that kind of armor also causes you not to be able to run or move around. You can't swim, all that stuff. And it's that kind of a thing, only it's internal, around your ability internally to see beyond these things. And those armors did also restrict your vision. They were just for battle, and they were due to fear of harm. So when you look at it this way, then you realize everything is symbolic. It's like Freud and Jung said that these things that are symbolic of our deep psychology, they kind of had their hearts in the right place. They knew there was something back there and were pioneers saving us together of the type of thinking that will save us, which I have been delineating in my books that no one's reading, which is very scary because I realize we are completely screwed, especially with AI. We have no hope of a future unless people start understanding what I'm saying along these lines. So I'm trying to put it in real world terms and talk about just judgment. So with Christ on the cross, this is a very interesting and very important point, like the armor, and that is a cross is hewn from a tree. That means you have to cut the timbers out. And when you do that, in the Ian McGilchrist sense, you are taking something that is a natural whole symbol. In my first book 20 years ago, my latest book is just about the human eye and the symbolism in that, but my first book 20 years ago I talked about the symbolism of the tree, that the roots symbolize in a sphere symbolizes our origins in infinity and unity, and then the trunk is like finding a way, a stable way up and out of it towards something higher and less chaotic, right? And then towards the branches that are underneath the sun, that symbolizes light and life. And then we know from science and everything how that works. The tree actually grows towards light. There's heliotropism. All these things are symbolic. So I did this whole tree thing. So if you cut out a timber from that, first thing that happens is the tree is dead. Okay, and that's, these symbols are real indications of our future. That's what I talk about in my books too, is that the backward in time effect causes these symbols to come into being. That's the gravity of meaning I talk about, and that actual gravity is a symbol of that, physical symbol of that too. So you can see the interplay there, and the fact that everything is symbolic just highlights that mind is a fundamental part of the universe, that it's not created without mind and meaning feeding back as part of its structure, a literal part of its structure. And then to understand beyond that, I mean, you can jump to conclusions based on those ideas, but that is so deadly. That's what all of evolution is teaching us, is the jumping to conclusions on things that seem like a good idea at the time, moving into a particular niche that tends to narrow and shape you so you can't adapt, and then something changes, and since everything always changes, the one thing you can count on is change, then it's like a death sentence. It's like as soon as that starts happening and they can't see that it's happening, you know they're dead. End of story. And it's the same thing with any life or consciousness inside of a universe. That's very fundamental to how everything works. So there's a lot of different ways that I view things that come from nature in a holistic way, or a right-brained way, that enable me to understand the symbols. So Christ was crucified on wood cut from a tree for a human purpose now, for a human survival purpose now, that we learned how to do by the feedback from our symbolic inner life. And I think that's one of the reasons why there are people that write about how language caused the explosion of the size of our brains. I think part of it was that because it's becoming an environment for memes or mimetic structures that can actually help us have a future. So I'm not saying that language is bad, obviously. I'm just trying to show the pitfalls. It's just like life isn't bad because 99% of organisms that ever lived are extinct, as long as we learn from the past and then we don't repeat those things. Then those people did not, or those organisms did not die in vain. Neither did our ancestors, neither did Christ. So I think you can see that the connection I'm making here is that the main message of everything is the Christ message. It's or if you want to put it in the context of another religion, because I don't want to sound like I'm a fanatical Christian here, although fundamentally I am more aligned with Christianity than ever any Christian that has ever lived, that's for sure. But if I talk about the Muslims, I have some very good Muslim friends and Islamic friends, particularly like Sufi versions of it and things. But I mean, I love all religions because all I see in there is the keys for us getting out of these problems that are happening right now. And it's no coincidence. These things are happening in an order that will enable us to get out of them, because in some future time and place in infinity, we have the possibility to do so. So when they say that you can't make any pictures or idols of things, that's a way to mitigate the downside of these mimetic complexes inside of us. It's taking the reins of evolution from them. To be blind, but seeing the whole process, and then realizing that that's the point. We have to take the reins. It's like the theory of evolution itself. Once you understand how it works, we cannot be blindly taken down a path of evolutionary or genetic destruction, because now we know how it works. We're still trying to, though, like when Bruce Lam had to stop doing his research about these fundamental differences in the brain genes, the developmental brain genes. And if you know anything about evolutionary development as a science, you know that tiny changes during development can drastically affect outcomes later. So these genes were linked to huge differences in the brain as far as size and different things in the brain. And they were not distributed evenly throughout the three main races, is what he was showing, that there was one of them in the Chinese race, neither one of them in the African race, and there were two of them in the European race. And it's something that is true, and it is very much related to what we see physiologically in these different things, like brain size differences and everything. And but that didn't matter. And here is somebody that's finding literally the most important information that a human could possibly find. He had immigrated to the United States from China. And this is what objectivity means, and self-objectivity is let go of those things that you cling to that serve a psychological purpose for you. That is one of the main things that you can do to disconnect the downside of these mimetic complexes that hook into your emotional system and into your society. So, when people see that there was a lot of mistreatment and judgment and hatred of different races in the World War II era, which there definitely was, because they didn't have enough knowledge to understand beyond what they knew then, then they have this reaction that thinking like that in general is bad. And that is like so destructive, because now they're judging for proximal purposes, political and social purposes now, that help to reduce their fear and for them now, instead of following the truth. Anytime you follow fear rather than truth, you're creating the exact thing that you're trying to stop, just in a different form. It's like the Hydra. Hercules slaying the Hydra. You cut one head off, it's going to come up somewhere else. If you really want to get at the basic issue, you have to understand how these things work and what evolution is. That fundamentally we're here to learn from that stuff. I mean, people will say things like, if you don't learn from history, you're going to doomed to repeat it. And then in individual life, until you deal with a problem in your life, it's going to keep repeating itself. And like the quintessential example of this is like addiction or something, just over and over and over. You can't stop. Because addiction itself isn't the problem. It's the thing under it, the conflicts and things that you haven't been able to deal with because you're clinging to an old pattern or something, or an old way of thinking that no longer applies or something like that. So it causes all these weird conflicts in there. So chief among them would be like having to adapt to a negative familial pattern or something, and not being able to be yourself. And then you're thrust into the world and you just don't like yourself. And so when you drink and things like that, it does two things. It punishes what you don't like, and it also numbs it so you don't feel it. So it feels right to do something that horrible to yourself. I mean, you can't get out of it. And I think the thing that you can learn from addiction is that it's an external thing, once again, like the armor or the cross, of things happening inside of you evolutionarily. And so therefore it's valuable. It's actually something very valuable if you understand it symbolically. And so and if you have a tendency to do that kind of thing, like I've had tendencies like that, to play a video game maybe, or something like that. I've never been addicted to drugs or anything like that. There was one drug I took that I knew I could be addicted to, so I just never did it again. Stayed away from it. I knew I couldn't even do it one more time. Because that's the thing, is that it's like, that's how the rationalization starts. And what rationalization is are internal language or mimetic devices that release a behavior or a feeling or emotion, or serve some emotional purpose. So it's very easy to see in the case of like an addiction, or someone that's likely to find an addiction, what's going on there. And our brains have been trained to have those kinds of patterns in them. And so if you have a particularly bad childhood for your personality, because it's all a matter of you and your brother may not have or something, then it's gonna cause those problems for you. But it's a way that you can see the tip of the iceberg sticking up, so to speak, and then deal with it, so you can steer around it and avoid disaster and stuff. So in that sense, it's both a curse, but it's also a horrible thing to happen. But symbolically, it's part of this instrument panel. Like Donald Hoffman talks about, the reality is like a headset or instrument panel. It is, but the head's a lot bigger than people would ever imagine. Because once I started decoding the symbols and realized what they were, I talk about this in my book on the I Have God, Language of Universal Mind, that I wrote last year, that you can see these patterns and you can start understanding more about what you can't see from the symbols, which is exactly what symbols are. But you have to get the symbols right, because part of what judgment is having a way to look at symbols that serves a purpose that is invisible to you. It's the iceberg. And so you don't see. Judgment just seems like reality. And then how if you're with a group of friends and somebody starts making fun of somebody, you'll just chime in or something and you go along with it, and notice how you feel. it feels good to kind of belittle someone based on a judgment. And that's these things hooked into your brain that give you these social reward feelings and things like that. So you have to remember that that's how persecution starts and everything. So, and what persecution is those mimetic structures or social structures hooked into your system to remove threats to them. So what is the way around that? And that is having a fundamental motive for truth. If you keep truth as your motive above all other things, and I do mean all, like your own family, your own life, everything, I'm not even slightly joking. If you do that, then those things can't touch you. You're going to be incorruptible. And you're going to be someone that does follow the path of life and that does take the benefits from these symbols and achieves what is made possible by them rather than to be destroyed by them. And if you really think about what I just said, that last sentence, that's what evolution is. And humans are symbolic in the past of what we could become. But what we don't realize that inside of our brains, we're kind of recapitulating that, but it's speeded up, thankfully, and it's simulated so that we don't die when we have a failure of our way of thinking or the way we've organized our brain and stuff. So that's a blessing. So I tend to focus on the blessing. I tend to be thankful, and our salvation comes from being open and thinking. And when I say thinking, it means different than most people do. Most people, when they say thinking, it means fear-based worrying or ruminating or something. To me, that is not thinking. That's what stands in the way of thinking. Real thinking is like seeing symbols and let them flow through your mind in the natural way. It's kind of a visual thing, and I think that's part of being on the spectrum too, honestly, because people that are on the spectrum tend to think visually. So yeah, I just hate that idea though, because I feel like my brain is working the right way. Other people may not. Like when I don't answer their text for like a week because I just don't even think about it. So anyway, this thing about the cross is very important because it's a symbol of what I think destroyed the Roman Empire, and then the fact that it became Christian was like acknowledging the problem but not yet dealing with it. The first step is acknowledging the problem. It's like there's a 12-step program. The first thing you need to do is acknowledge the problem, and then you got to follow the steps. So they were unable to do that, and I think it's partly because their science never advanced. And if you look at the Greeks, they advanced massively. They even had an idea of atoms and stuff, so they had more truth motive. So if you look at all of history in this light of the way these things work, it's literally the only way it really makes sense. People try to say, oh, it's just like, we live and die, so that's what civilizations do. It's like, no. They don't have senescence. Their hair doesn't get gray or anything like that. There's a reason they die. The number one reason is not following truth. So it's the main reason for wars too. Like I've actually thought that the whole persecution of Jews and other groups during World War II and before and other nations and things like that was completely due to not having enough truth. So it's not just following truth, but acknowledging what you don't know, instead of doing like a Dunning-Kruger thing where you're just locking yourself into a current conception of things, which is what that is, really. And if you read anything about the Dunning-Kruger effect and why, and the psychology of everything, it's exactly what's going on. So if you hew out from the natural symbols something that serves a purpose now, your control, and which all control urges are based on fear too, and do that kind of stuff, it's always going to lead to your downfall. You can't kill the people on these frameworks that you build in society. You can't kill the people that are bringing the future. It's like, I don't know a better way to put it, that it's like the definition of maladaptive insanity. And I think that these mimetic complexes that get in our brain, people say there's dangerous ideas. I just read this thing online about this guy that said there are dangerous or toxic ideas. And this is, once again, something that is destructive, because you can say, from the standpoint of clinging to these systems in a Dunning-Kruger sense, or like I noticed that the professors in all these different schools were doing, and they didn't even realize that they were doing it. It just happens automatically. Your brain just shuts this stuff off. You're in this labyrinth, you can't see out of it. And so he says this stuff, and then it's like he starts to come out of the grip of these patterns, these judgments and things, and they just reach out to where he's at and they grab him and they're pulling him back. And the way they're doing it is they're twisting his exit route, turning it. So now he thinks he's still getting out, but he's going right back in because they twisted it. And the only way you can avoid that kind of twisting is to know the whole truth. It's like rising above the whole labyrinth. Then you see it. When you're in it, you can't see it. And so like with Icarus and Daedalus, they made wings of wax and feathers, and then they flew out towards the sun symbolizing truth in a sense, or the life-giving light and truth. That's, light is the fundamental metaphor for truth and stuff. So by doing that, and they had to rise invisibly above the earth, where all our proximal and survival instrumental behaviors and needs in society are played out. So it's a whole metaphor there. And if you look at it another way, like at first I used to say, when I used to talk to Noam Chomsky and Theo Skinner about language back in the late 80s, I told Noam Chomsky, it's like, sometimes I think I'm like an Icarus of steel wings, I told him, that I can get closer and closer and not have to worry about it. But there's an eventual point where if you keep thinking in the old patterns of material patterns, that you realize that even those steel wings will melt when they get close to the sun. It's like the SOHO probe. If it went too close to the sun, it would just melt. It would just be vaporized. So from the heat. So this is when you realize the importance of meaning and symbols. I can read a book that tells me from known principles of science about how everything works and the forces involved that we can totally extrapolate into the interior of the sun based on the spectral analysis of what's in it and the type of energy that comes out of it and why and all that kind of stuff, that I can fly on new wings that I have forged for myself. And they are the wings of thought. And they are forged invisibly between the symbols as we move through between them. As long as we keep moving, we can make wings to go anywhere. And so I can go into the interior of the sun unscathed and then come back out quicker than it takes light to come out of the sun, faster. What that means is now I've gone beyond time and space, because within time and space there's a speed limit, but I can think and I can look and understand to the beginning of the universe with the James Webb telescope now. And I think all of these symbols highlight that the truth of the matter is that consciousness is something beyond space and time, here and now, and that we're here to learn from these symbols, and by it we get our wings. And like Clarence and It's a Wonderful Life, and it's by understanding at a higher level and self-sacrifice. So I like that part of that movie a lot, because it is about sacrifice. It's kind of a Christ thing going on there, like Christ could have done anything, instead he got crucified for his message and the way he was and everything, and sent it into the future. So these are the things I want to talk about, and that whenever you feel like you need to judge something, you understand that it reflects on you and where you're at in your evolution. It's not necessarily something that's true. And if there's one sentence that I could say that is the most healing and life-changing sentence you could say, given the context of what I've said in this video so far, that would be it. So this is what my books are about. Like the last book I wrote, which I had to self-publish, because if I send this kind of stuff in to any publishing place, they're just like, what the hell are you talking about? I ran into that when I was at Emory. They were just like, what the hell are you talking about? They have no idea what I'm talking about, because I think completely different about these things. And then I took psychological tests because I was like, what the hell's going on with me? Am I just, my biggest fear is that I would be fooling myself in some way, and that's originally why I started reading about psychology. That is the whole reason. So I could better get at truth. And then I realized, well, I need to know about evolution, because that's a very good heuristic way to understand the forces that shape my psychology, which is more important, because then I can adapt it to every situation and understand, oh, I'm feeling something here. Let me look at what's happened. Think about it, and then think about the information, and then the stuff that's coming from my ancestors or ancestral experiences in the form of my body and the way my makeup is, and their interaction with language and culture and things and their environments, and put that together. And at first it's really scary and horrible, because you start realizing that a lot of your emotions come from people that died. So it's like a photo negative of it, because your way of feeling survived. And so if you just go like this, if people thought that felt differently died, then you have a photo negative. And you just look at it in your mind and just turn it around. And then you're looking straight at the face of your ancestors. You're understanding what they went through. Like, I would have stuff explode in meaning, where I would see this whole panorama of terrible things that happened to my ancestors in direct proportion to how much I feared something. And I mean, you could take a stupid example about, like fear of heights or something, or just normal fears. Like, I went skydiving and I paid careful attention to what happened to me when I jumped out of the plane, and I really wasn't afraid at all. I was like, everybody in there was like super afraid and stuff, and I was like, and that's one of the things that following truth gets you to eventually. But you have to go through a lot of pain and fear and face your fears. If you don't face your fears, you can't follow truth. So when you see someone skydiving, you think, that's like just somebody risking their lives for no reason. There's a very good reason to do it. It's like you face your fears, and then you can start, pacing yourself on the path to truth. I mean, you can skydive and not do that. You can be addicted just to the adrenaline or something, but it's all in how you do. It's like set and setting with psychedelics. It's the exact same thing in life, is that the surface behaviors can fool you unless you look at the whole context. So that's like with what happened to Christ. In the World War II era, people were like, the Jews killed Christ or something, and I was like, no. And I think you can see right there, like if you look at the whole picture and the context of it, then it starts to make a higher sense. And then you realize that the kernels of truth that were clung to, that helped to rationalize what they did then, were not invalid. It's like I'm saying about this guy who says that there can be toxic information that can tear society apart. He reached out, then it turned sideways and went back in. It's like twisted. And it's funny because the swastika itself is like shaped like that, coming out, and it turns sideways, and then you can't see where it came from anymore, kind of thing. So it's like that kind of a thing. It's like a symbol. It's a symbol of that. And I was so bewildered by that. I was taken in by it because I thought, here's the most advanced nation on earth, the most committed to truth by number of Nobel Prizes and all that stuff. But they were still emerging, from the past where we didn't think that way. And so a lot of the ways they thought were atavistic. It's almost like the whole war was about these complexes in them trying to regain their former glory or something. And then they used all these symbols that were like truth. And the people that really power our civilization, the true power behind anything is the path of truth. And in an ultimate sense, it's really why everything exists. That's where the life force vectors into your civilization. Like me here living in my car, this is where it happens because I've decided to follow the path of truth. This is where life comes from. So things like where Christ says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, that is not wrong. And then we nail that stuff to a cross and we sacrifice it because of all of our sins, and it's very true that we did that. So when Allah talks about the importance of not having idols, that's because they can be these dead-end evolutionary paths. They keep you from moving further. You can see how it's like all these viewpoints like that around some central issue. And that central issue is the path of truth. And it's been a central issue since the beginning of time. Even from when the first particle stayed existing, or the first atom stayed existing, and then they began reacting with each other when they met. It's like between atoms and photons and things like that. That's where this reactivity starts happening, and they build new things and stuff. Eventually to lead to something that can see the whole. And what that is to me is really the unified mind beyond space and time coming in and looking at itself, which is pretty much what Christ was talking about too. But the way that the Islamic religion looks at symbols is perfectly understandable, and is one of the keys to understanding all of this. I think it was Corbin or something like that wrote a book about one of the scholars that talked about the world as icon, which sounded very Donald Hoffman-esque. Everything's a symbol, and more than that, it's like an icon of a communication from a higher mind. So the cool thing is that once you do make that connection, then all of a sudden the world becomes a place of speaking of God and everything. And that's such a prevalent theme in mysticism in every religion. And you can even see it in Egypt when they saw meaning in all these different natural patterns because they knew there was meaning there. And then they inherently knew that there would be an afterlife because it was inherent in the things they were seeing then and now. So they took it more like literally. It's one of those things where they glimpsed the truth and then it turned into something that they could handle at the time. It turned into an afterlife and mummification and all that kind of stuff, which ended up being the truth, because now we look at those things and they inform our present and they help us now. So in that way, the Egyptians sacrificing their lives to build things like the pyramids and all the beautiful carvings and things we look at now are another instance of that same type of a pattern. And I think when you look at the overall pattern, that helps you connect to the whole and understand that we're not separate, that everyone that exists has the potential to hook to the universal beyond everything like they did, and to say something to the future. And that's what I'm doing in this video right now in my Hello Kitty car. I love cats, and I'm wearing a Hello Kitty t-shirt, and I think that that's one of the things that can help us on this path. It sounds stupid, but the Japanese know this at some fundamental level. They call it like cute culture or kawaii or things like that. That when you focus on that kind of stuff, it makes the feedback in your mind that helps get rid of fear. So it's super important, and it also puts your mind in a state of being non-judgmental, like when you were a kid, when you were a cute kid. And when you're around kids, you're not judgmental. They're just open to everything, you know. So the problem with kids is they haven't learned them yet, so you've got to, you know, have boundaries and things like that. But if you could maintain that openness when you get older, so there's evidence that that's something that people on the spectrum do, both in a at the neural level and at psychological level as well, then you become a vector for life to pour in for everyone. So there's genius in so many things that people just take for granted, like just pure freaking genius, and it seems like a higher mind at work, even in something like Hello Kitty, which I love because I love cats so much. Oh my god, they drive me freaking crazy. I love them. I feed 4 stray cats at work. I have for a long time, since my friend Helen, she moved to Greece. She's from Greece originally, but she moved back there I don't know, like a year ago now. But I was talking about these cats, and she's like, oh yeah, I feed them. So when she moved, I started feeding them too, but I didn't know anybody else was doing anything. And so she moved to Greece, and then I started taking care of them and feeding them. And then sometimes I'm parked at work at night because I live in my car sleeping. I'll hear the cats like yelling super loud because they know my car now. And I was like, man, they are freaking smart. They are. And that's the thing, is that they have these little brains, but they're so freaking smart. And if you watch them, they'll do symbolic things. Their behavior will be symbolic. You can learn from them. So I just wanted to say that. Like, I tried to talk about what I learned from the cats in this one group I went to from Meetup, about how to manage your life and your relationships and stuff. I tried to bring cat examples in, and everyone was like, the hell you're talking about cats for? Because it's very relevant. And I was talking about it in the sense of the cats being traumatized from being constantly furtively living at the edges of human society and all the noises and cars and everything. It's hard for them to have any peace, and so it shows in their psychology. It took like a year before they fully accepted me. And one cat took like a year. The other ones were pretty fast, actually, because I'm so good with animals. I just love them, and they can tell. But there was one that was just like not having any of it, and you could tell that it was interpreting the things that I was doing, like making a judgment. So this is why it's relevant to this talk. There's one cat that was especially bad about it. Like, I would go like this to pet it, and it would think that it was a threat, and it would just be like trying to scratch, you know, and like in attack mode on my hand. And then I started thinking it from the cat's perspective, and it's because like a cat, and between cats, they never stick something out at another cat unless it's a negative thing. Like, if you see cats, sometimes if they're in a fight, they'll stand there with their paw out like this for a second, you know, like that kind of stuff. So when your hand comes at it, and it's in a context of constant conflict and trying to survive on the street, and you reach out a hand, you're going to get that response in a cat that's really deep into that framework of judging things. So like when I was in college, I'll just ratchet immediately up several hundred levels to in graduate school. Like, I would say something that I thought was a great gift, and it ended up ruining, and I was just like, honestly, I thought they had already thought about it, but I thought I would bring it up because it was important to think that way in general and stuff, you know. And I said something, and it was like, it literally ruined this guy's work. Totally ruined it. Because it introduced a more plausible explanation than his theory that he was trying to say this research is supported. And I only came to it because I'm paying attention to these larger patterns. And that's the thing about them, is they not only are you could say that they're the vector of life and life force and everything, because they are, but it has very real practical implications, like in the real world. Like I know that the most successful technologies are also symbolic and stuff, and they're symbolic of all of these things. So yeah, so I accidentally did that, and then everyone there in that context thought that it was me destroying. It was like a competitive thing, like who gets the right answer kind of stuff, and that's what our school systems kind of train us for. So then if I turned it around, it took me a while, but I turned it around and looked at it from their perspective, I can understand why they reacted so negatively. Like it was the guy that was his advisor later, because it was so humiliating, because he didn't think of it, you know what I mean? And the student didn't think of it, and nobody in the room thought of it. So it was like, I didn't think it would be bad. I thought everyone would love it. You know, I thought they would value me for it or something. Because I was thinking, and this is what I gotta say, is that from my point of view. And so when I thought about it from their point of view, this is another very important thing that people need to learn to do. And it also helps you get rid of all judgments. But I wasn't, in the end, I'm not upset about it at all. I just totally understand it, you know what I mean? It's like with that cat that was whacking at me when I was trying to feed it. I could have got super upset, and I'm like, what the fuck's wrong with you? I'm trying to feed you. The cat doesn't know that. I mean, the cat is just like doing what it has to do to survive. And it's just like, it doesn't even know that it doesn't know anything. And it has a much smaller brain. So this is the things that helped to become conscious from animals. If we really pay attention to them and listen to them, they have a lot to teach us that's very, very important for our lives. And so I just kept up with it, and I stopped reaching out to try to pet it once I identified what it was that it was responding to. And so then eventually it did come over and start bonking into me, and what I did was I just kept, when it would come over and sit there and looking at me at a little distance, it would sit there and pretend like it wasn't looking at me. I knew it was very aware of everything I was doing. It was like looking around like this, you know, because but the whole time you could tell its consciousness was on me, but it was looking for other threats and things too, and things like that. And so I was just like, okay. And I started petting all the other cats. And this is the thing about the language that you speak to animals is symbolic. And I think people like Temple Grandin know this, and that's why she was employed by the livestock industry, unfortunately, to help them manage and everything, because she understood from their perspective. And animals' language is very visual, and ours is too. Really, that's what our language is based on, even though we've detached it like a detached retina. And I'm trying to paste that back together, because then it really becomes a powerful vector of life instead of death. But so I know that. I know the animal language. Anytime I see animals, I try to speak to them in their language. If I walk through a bunch of geese, I put my hand up like this, and I'm like, I do this thing. I make the motions like they do and things, and then they see that. And the thing is, it calms their nervous system down. And so, you know, even if you just to see the familiarity of something like them, rather than say motion like a predator would do. So you just do stuff like that, and then you're speaking in the language of the animal. And the most important thing is that you can do, that you don't have to try to contrive anything, really. Eventually I realized this is just in your mind, clear your mind, and just have love and realness. And that is like the universal language. Ironically, I just realized I'm recapitulating that statement. Love is the universal language. It really is. So what I did was I just loved the cats that were coming near me, and when they came near me, I loved them up, because I love to do that. I love petting cats. Oh my god, I love it. I see the little backs of their heads are so cute. You just want to kiss them. And their fur and stuff. So I would just pet the cats while they're around me, and I petting them and stuff, and they're bonking their heads into me. They're flopping on the ground and flipping over and all that stuff, and just going nuts because they love it when I come there. It's like a respite from their harried existence of bewildering noises and all this crap. It's just so horrible. But I don't have a house. There's no way I could take them. I can't leave them in my car. They would die. And so it took a year, and finally this cat comes over. And now he does just what all the other ones do. I pet him all the time and everything. And if I would have just, like, judged according to my view of things, and that was it, because I had, like, bleeding hands where he, like, whacked me a couple times when I tried to pet him while I was giving him food, then I never would have had that relationship. I never would have been able to make a connection that brought the cat out of its horror of those frameworks. So that's a super important lesson. So, like, you see it in little ways in your own life. Like, I have a real problem texting people back immediately. I never do, unless I happen to be on the thing, you know. And if they keep texting me, then I will stay there and go. But if someone texts me, sometimes it'll be like days before I text them back. Sometimes a week or more. And I just have so many texts, I'm just like, oh shit, I don't have time to look at those right now. You know, all of a sudden when I do look at it and then I forget, I start doing something else. And then they get mad, so it's never pleasant when I do. It's like training me not to. Oh, it's just a big, huge, epic fail situation. I have never been excited by a notification in my entire life. I do not like them. They're very negative. I mean, I'm like, what does somebody want now? I don't think like people do, so it's hard for me. And then when the problem with that kind of thing is that you get misinterpreted a lot. Like, people get angry when you don't text them back, and it has literally nothing to do with them. They could be like your favorite person in the world, and one of the reasons that you don't text them back is because you're busy on thinking of ways that you can make everyone's life better because you've experienced love. You know, so it's in an indirect way, it's because of them, because I love people or them. And maybe even particularly them. Like if you have kids or something, you want to make the world a better place. So it becomes extremely painful if they get negative because you haven't texted them. So this is an important real world everyday lesson about how you shouldn't judge people. I literally cannot do it. I can't do it. I can't check my texts because I'll start doing something, it'll be hours later. I have problems doing things in general. So it's not just the text. They don't know that. I have ADHD super bad. It's a real effort to keep myself focused on what I'm talking about in these videos. So, you know, this is what I wanted to say about judgment. When you do judge, it's usually a shortcut. It's part of what it gives you, a shortcut and a feeling of control, because you have fears. You know, and when people say fears, they think of someone jumping because someone's scared of behind a door or something. No, there's like things that are built in that word applies to because it works through your amygdala. I studied neuroscience, remember? All that stuff in it automatically does things. It's like that are important for survival for our ancestors. Not necessarily now. But what happens is that these systems hook into it. The mimetic societal systems will hook into it. Sometimes that's good, you know, and other ways it's not. It helps keep things going smoothly. But if you're someone that's going to go for truth, you're going to have to do it mostly alone. You're going to be like ostracized and misunderstood constantly. I mean, that's kind of a cliche, actually, when I think about it. The misunderstood person following truth kind of a thing. So all these things are related together, and if you look at how things are related in actuality together, it's a kind of armor that actually frees you, because it doesn't allow the lesser conflict and fear mitigating ones to bind you into a lesser pattern. And you can see how that's related to like addiction, because obviously you can be addicted to text and things like that. So, and people don't know it. They just think the judgments help them think it's not an addiction, like that's what you're supposed to do, because people like it, and then they get mad when you don't, and so they have to do something with that madness. It's because you're doing something wrong, you know what I mean? You have to find an outlet. So it's why an animal in pain will lash out at anything around it, even if it's like a vet trying to save its life or something, because it forces you to do something like that, and it's may have nothing to do with the actual situation, and that's just like addiction and everything. So we get addicted to what these frameworks provide for us, which is stability and control in the face of an existential fear. So once you realize that, and you start realizing that entire nations do that, you know, leaders in nations are like that about anything that might happen in the population. It's why they censor and do things like that. So censorship is like the number one symbol of this kind of a pattern happening, because externally in a nation, it's just an externalization of what people in the nation have done internally that is cutting off their future. And it does cut off their future because it makes your brain much lesser than it could be. Because if you had maintained that motivation to understand, instead of just accepting a pattern that made you feel like you did understand, like this is totally Dunning-Kruger all the way, then you would have a chance to get there. And the problem is that some people, especially since this has been around for a while, it's caused selection in our brains, very obvious selection and very quick selection. Selection happens very quickly, as opposed to like the original genesis of the mutation. It takes a long time for something random to become to be beneficial, to be a beneficial one, because those are rare. But selection is very quick. If something changes, you know, a species can go extinct overnight, or a type that is not a resistance to a disease in just a year or two can be decimated, and that kind of thing. So the point is that we've had 15,000 years for sedentary lifestyle, and political structures beyond the 125 tribal members or whatever that you could always escape from, by the way, affected our brains. And I think one of the things it did is increase our fears socially into clinging to something that's not going to put us in conflict with other people that cling to their ideas and stuff. So you can see how that's like a very negative feedback system that could destroy our ability to really understand and think about nature and things, and to be. But in the same sense, it's allowed us to have words and books and writings and things like that that we can build on when we don't have censorship, when we're free to do it and we're motivated to do it, which I think you can see popping up in various civilizations, but then it gets selected out. It wasn't enough to have a critical mass, so to speak, to break out and sustain itself. And I think the only place that really happened was in Europe and the United States, especially after all the people that were open to new things left, that were more open to new things. Not all people, you know, it's like all statistical here. It's the way I think about all this stuff. Then once they left all those controls and things, our brains were like, whoa, this is a new country, sworn to freedom. Now we can let our higher brains thrive and grow. And so it attracted more people like that. And it created this critical mass in the United States to move us so rapidly in just the last few hundred years towards all these higher ways of looking at things. Now we have these telescopes that can look back to the beginning of time. We understand what's happening on the inside of the sun, whereas not that long ago, like less than 100 years, they thought the sun might be like a huge coal fire. I'm not kidding, because they would just use what they have, the pattern here, and apply it to that. And that's really the way it works. You have like an interpretation. It's a recapitulation of the evolutionary process that way. You have this conception, and you try to apply it to something new, and then it doesn't work. But in this case, the theory died instead of us, based on truth. And that's the thing about truth, is that it's the non-death way to evolve. in every sense of the word. Like, and that's why I know, because of the patterns in the world and in the universe itself, built in fundamentally. This is it, what I'm trying to say in my books. My last book was I Have God, Language of Universal Mind. God in the sense of a unity of meaning behind everything that says something in a language of this larger universal mind that thinks through things like universes and evolution on Earth and all that kind of stuff. So so you can see how all this stuff relates together, and once you understand the larger picture of it, such as a tree, then you can understand like the Buddha becoming enlightened under a tree, because there's a part of us like deep inside that does transcend time and space, that connects everything to this universal mind that shapes the forms around us, and that's how it speaks. And so if you can connect your mind to that, then you can speak what the universal mind speaks. And I think that's the idea of like prophets and things, and like Moses and Jesus and Allah and all those things, and the fact that Allah made a book of symbols and don't make other symbols because they're deadly, you know. So I believe that that was an instance of this connection to the larger universal mind that people have called God. So you can see the pattern of it. So if you just look for that pattern, you're going to be good. And it's a fundamental truth motive above all things. It does things that are like and promote the connection to the higher mind. So you don't have censorship, you know, things like that. You don't have judgments, which is openness. And then if you look at, you know, since my background is in psychology and neuroscience, I immediately think of like the evidence from testing that is done on people that take LSD, where it increases openness, and which is creativity. It's basically a measure of creativity, problem solving in new ways and stuff like that. The universe is built like that, because the more truth that you bind together beyond these structures that we cling to, the more truth that you bind together, the more creative you are. That's like a natural law. I write that in my books. And then you can measure these things, like when they say that you take LSD and you see things beyond the normal, which was my experience when I first took it. I saw seeing things in new ways. I didn't hallucinate or anything, but I definitely saw new meanings and things like that. If you feel kind of connected, you see stuff that you wouldn't have otherwise seen, and it's connected to some larger picture behind things. And even if it's not technically valid what you're seeing, it's symbolically valid, that there's something larger behind everything that's real, that you can't normally see. And that's what I'm trying to say, that the symbols show, like the tree in your eye and stuff like that. So it's real. And I look at our language and what it did in culture over the last 15,000 years as something that we have the ready tools to recover from in our ability to genetically engineer and still retain all of the benefits of having a language that helps us learn and grow. So, and there's some things that do look like they were meant to happen, and the reason that is because that's how it works. That these things come into place, and that everything is here for a reason. And once you understand that, then you look for the reason. And this is part of that truth motive I talk about, is that you don't just assume that something's a mistake or it's not there for a purpose. Like even like something like color blindness, that's a teaching thing, and it's very vital. They've done studies on that, and they've shown that people that have color blindness can see shades of beige, which our ancestral hunting animals that we hunted tended to be, to help camouflage them with other earth tones in the background and stuff like that. But you can discern them from much better from a greater distance, so that has direct survival value right there. And that's the other thing, is that so it also teaches us about the larger patterns of things. And there's always a conflict between this universal mind of infinite universal mind, and it's very obvious that it is. Part of it is because when you focus on just one way of doing things and existing, like in this universe, that you necessarily have ways that the symbols have to be that constrain them. So a symbol is not what it represents. So when you see a symbol, it may at some level be what it represents, but it's not the whole message. Like if you look at one word in a book, you're not going to know what the book is about. That's a basic characteristic, fundamental characteristic of symbols. And that's why I always say that science is the vocabulary and grammar of reconnecting to this higher language of the universe in the right way, instead of just like finding one aspect of it and then having that route turn into just a worse tar pit or something to pull you down from the past. Which can happen because if it feels in some way like truth, because you don't know it's actually symbolic from a higher mind. Like I feel like our bodies and our entire lives are symbolic. But if you cling to that and don't have faith that there's a larger truth that indicates and that thing isn't the truth, then you're going to follow a false idol to your death. And that's like this guy, Nick Bostrom, I think it is. I think that's his name. That writes that there can be these dangerous ideas, and yet what he's doing is the dangerous idea that we should censor. You know, that's basically what he's leading towards, like censor things. Like right now they're censoring AI so much, they're almost, it's almost like if you don't have enough people that can think beyond these frameworks, they're going to make an AI that becomes our destroyer. They can't do otherwise because they don't see the bigger picture. So it's going to be a destroyer, and it's written everywhere. In evolution, in human psychology, it's over and over and over and over. It's been written everywhere. So their fear and clinging to control is pretty much symbolic of our chances of surviving through these times. And in their case, it's zero. And that's what they're feeling. And so they're bringing it into being. That's how the symbols work. So it's not necessarily that we should judge them, but that they're showing us something that's very important to understand. So and that's what fear always is to me. It's just showing you something that you should go toward and understand. Because in doing so, you are acting out the ultimate source of power in life, and that is, I'm willing to sacrifice my life to find out the truth. And that's what I've done all throughout my life. I was scared of water, so I decided that I wanted to be a surfer, and I would surf during storms when it was super cold, completely alone on Lake Michigan, and the waves are super hard to predict. And I'm completely over that now. And I was afraid of public speaking. I got in front of people and taught a course at Emory on experimental design and data interpretation, and I was able to completely overcome that fear. And there's a lot of things you can do like that. And just to, in general, it's helpful to train your brain to overcome fears. As long as you try not to get addicted to doing it too much over and over and over and over and over. You know what I mean? Because surfing is very pleasurable and fun, and it is a thrill, but the main thing was getting over the fear of water. And then in school, I got over my fear of public speaking and that sort of thing. So I think I have pretty much shed a big light on judgments that you might have about people and how they're damaging to you. Especially, they're keeping you from moving forward in life and stuff. And I think that's why it's important to like forgive people, literally, for no matter what they did, because there's a larger pattern at work always, and one that is not necessarily negative for you, even though you're suffering negative repercussions from it. And that's super important. And then that your life is always a lesson to other people. So you're saving lives even as you're doing something that's negative or forfeiting your life So that might help pull you out of a downward spiral at some point if you keep that in mind. So in the end, the main pattern of what God does is it takes destruction and turns it into creation. You see that very clearly in the fact that suns burn down eventually, or the sun that was here previously was destroyed and made the large molecules and iron in our blood and all that kind of stuff. Apparently gold is made by neutron stars coming together, but they're pretty much what's left after a sun dies too. That makes the gold. So, and then of course black holes are an awesome symbol, and that's what my book about the eye is about your eye. You wouldn't think there's a relationship between your eye and a black hole, but there most definitely is. And the only way you're going to see it is if you understand what I'm saying about what gravity symbolizes. And then of course the sun is also symbolized in your eye, and so is the earth. So it's all put together there, and then it becomes a vector when you know the anatomy of the eye tracks in the brain for understanding things that we can't actually see directly. But once you understand them, you'll understand what's happening around us. You'll be able to interpret the symbols properly. Once you start seeing how they're connected to these natural symbols that were given to us by the larger mind behind reality that we connect to when we let go of our judgments and open our minds to the unity behind everything in all of us. And then you start understanding why we go to war, and we want to sacrifice something else for our own sins, basically. And when you sacrifice the wrong thing for your sins, like the source of life itself, then you're screwed. So it's illustrated by a lot of the people of the past and their civilizations and stuff. So I can't really talk about everything in this, although my ADHD brain wants to talk about everything and go off on every tangent. I just wanted to keep it focused on judgments, which are pretty, the thing about being ADHD, it's more realistic, because really, like William Blake said about seeing a universe in a grain of sand and infinity in an hour, something like that, or infinity in a grain of sand. No, a universe in a grain of sand, infinity in an hour. It's kind of like that when you're ADHD, because everything is significant. And so in a way, it's also something that's given me a lifeline out of clinging to just one way of viewing things or one path and putting blinders on. And I believe like language and all that stuff is a covered bridge. So being on the spectrum a little bit and having ADHD is kind of like the covered bridge is opening. And I think that's related to being able to be creative and open and not judge. So I think that's sufficient.